The story begins with showing a guy named David. Early one morning, he shared his feelings with his friend about his daughter Lily, who was about to graduate. But the problem was, he would surely meet his ex-wife, Georgia, at the graduation ceremony. Their relationship had been tense since the divorce. Meanwhile, Georgia was discussing the same issue with her friend. If it weren't for Lily, Georgia wouldn't even want to see her ex-husband again. The next day, David got in touch with Lily. During the call, he asked her to reserve a seat for him away from Georgia at the graduation. Lily reassured him, saying everything was sorted. Shortly after, David's ex-wife called with the same request. Being a good daughter, Lily promised her parents wouldn't cross paths at the event. The following day, David and Georgia joined Lily and her friend Ren on a trip to the airport. The plan was for Lily to enjoy a 3-month vacation in Bali, Indonesia, to celebrate her graduation. As days passed, Lily and Ren soaked in the beauty of Bali. One day, while swimming and losing track of time, they missed their boat. Luckily, a local guy named Gade, traveling by boat, offered them a ride. Lily was so charmed by Gade's good looks that she forgot about her friend. That night, in gratitude, Lily and Ren invited Gade to a bar. Since Lily liked him right away, she kept chatting and getting closer to Gade. During their conversation, she discovered Gade was a seaweed farmer. Caught up in the moment, Lily boldly kissed Gade. The next morning, Lily found herself at Gade's place. She went for a walk, and seeing Gade harvesting seaweed, she was captivated once again. Gade gently taught Lily how to harvest seaweed, and in that moment, she smiled happily. She never expected to find true love on this vacation. A month and a week later, back in America, while Georgia was working, David called. He asked if she had seen Lily's email. Georgia was confused, but upon checking, was shocked to read that Lily was getting engaged to Gade the next day. In disbelief, Georgia decided to go to Bali. Boarding the plane, she was annoyed to find David sitting next to her, unarranged. Despite trying to change seats, the plane was full, but luckily the person next to Georgia agreed to swap. Before the flight, the pilot and Georgia's boyfriend, Paul, welcomed her. Seeing the closeness between his ex-wife and Paul, David felt jealous but pretended not to. Upon reaching Bali, they discussed how to convince Lily to return to America. Georgia and David disagreed with their daughter's decision to marry young, fearing she might end up like them, divorced. After meeting Lily, the three of them hopped on a local bus to Gade's house. When they got there, they finally met Gade. His whole extended family was bustling around, getting ready for the engagement ceremony later that afternoon. David then invited Gade outside for a chat, getting straight to the point, advising him to think carefully about the marriage. David, speaking from experience, was convinced that Gade would get bored and divorced within 5 years, just like him. Gade was surprised to hear this. In the afternoon, the engagement ceremony kicked off, and Gade's father explained that the wedding, following Balinese customs, would take place in 4 days. While this was happening, David and Georgia were busy discussing ways to disrupt their daughter's wedding. Later that evening at the hotel, David and Georgia asked the receptionist to put their rooms as far apart as possible. Unfortunately, with all the rooms already taken, the receptionist reluctantly placed their rooms next to each other. That night, David headed to the bar, lost in thought. Ren joined him, and they had a long chat about Lily's childhood. In the middle of the conversation, Ren asked David about his divorce. With a hint of sadness, David explained that he and Georgia had grown tired of work, leading to big fights over small problems. David tried to mend things by building Georgia's dream house by the lake, but a few months after completion, it caught fire. This incident strained their relationship even more, eventually leading to their divorce. Despite it all, David still deeply loved Georgia. The next day, when David met with Georgia, he shared a plan for the upcoming ring exchange ceremony. He revealed that Lily and Gade would use special Balinese custom rings, and if they stole the rings before the ceremony, the wedding would be delayed, giving them extra time to figure things out. David mentioned that Gade's young cousin was keeping the rings. With David's information-gathering task completed, it was now Georgia's turn to retrieve the rings. She approached Gade's cousin, who was playing, and used a magic trick to divert the cousin's attention. In the afternoon, when Gade wanted to get the ring from his cousin, everyone realized it was missing. In the midst of panic, Gade thought Georgia and David had taken it. That night, Gade took David shopping and revealed he knew about David's plan. Gade advised David to return the ring before Lily found out, as it might upset her. Gade left immediately, and when David shared this with Georgia, they ended up arguing again, recalling memories from before their divorce. David expressed his feelings and left Georgia. The next morning, Lily asked her parents to help harvest seaweed. While harvesting, Georgia apologized for being emotional the night before, and David finally apologized too. As things warmed up between them, Georgia challenged David to a seaweed harvesting competition. In the afternoon, after buying new rings, the ring exchange ceremony happened, followed by a traditional tooth filing ceremony called metata. In the evening, Lily invited Gade, Ren, and her parents to a bar. To bring them closer, Lily suggested a game where the loser had to drink as much as possible. The next day, Georgia was surprised to wake up next to David, realizing they got super drunk the night before and shared a bed. Suddenly, Georgia's boyfriend, Paul, showed up. In a hurry, Georgia sneaked out, and David kept Paul busy. Shortly afterward, Georgia came out of David's room pretending to have just woken up. Fortunately, Paul didn't suspect anything. Paul mentioned that he intentionally took a 2-day leave to spend time with Georgia in Bali. After changing clothes, the three of them met Lily and Gade. Their plan for the day was to explore the beauty of Bali, starting with the beach. When they entered a cave, suddenly Paul knelt down to propose to Georgia. Georgia was shocked, but before she could answer, Paul fainted. It turned out that, unbeknownst to him, he had been bitten by a snake. After Paul recovered, he wanted to continue their plans, but Georgia stayed in the hospital. Lily got upset, feeling her mom shouldn't marry a younger man. She believed it would lead to the same mistakes. Georgia fell silent, pondering Paul's proposal. David, Lily, and Gade continued their journey to the coastal cliffs near the forest. On the way, David tried to reassure Lily about her mom's decisions, telling her not to worry. Meanwhile, Georgia felt uneasy, hearing Lily raise her voice for the first time. To clear the air, Georgia decided to join her daughter. When they met at the cliff, Georgia apologized and things got better. However, as they enjoyed the view, they noticed Gade's boat drifting away. Now stuck, Gade explained there were no tourists this late, so they had to wait for the boat until tomorrow. They then divided tasks. Lily and Georgia would prepare the campfire, while David and Gade would search for food. While collecting branches, Lily found her missing ring in Georgia's bag. Disheartened, she approached her father, asking if he knew about the ring. Instead of consoling her, David and Georgia got into a heated debate, blaming each other. Lily, holding back tears, left the scene. As the rain started, David and Georgia found shelter and had a sincere conversation. Georgia felt her selfishness might have led to their marriage falling apart. She had been too engrossed in work, neglecting her role as a wife and mother. The next morning, they began to reconnect. Lily and Gade later arrived with some tourists willing to give them a ride. Back at the hotel, Paul, now recovered, welcomed them. In that moment, still upset, Lily declared that she didn't want her parents at her wedding ceremony later in the evening. Shocked, David and Georgia heard their daughter's heartfelt words. In the evening, while Ren was doing Lily's makeup, Georgia joined. After Ren left, Georgia apologized and explained she initially wanted to cancel Lily's wedding because she didn't want her daughter to go through what she went through with David. However, after the events of the previous night, Georgia realized that everyone has their own love story, and she shouldn't stand in the way of her daughter's happiness. Touched by this, Lily and her mother finally reconciled. Later that evening, the wedding ceremony began. In the middle of it, Gade suddenly stopped and said he wouldn't proceed without David's blessing. David was impressed and happily gave his blessing for Gade to marry his daughter. After the ceremony, Georgia confided in David that she still hadn't answered Paul's proposal. David advised her that if she felt Paul was the right man, she should accept his proposal. Despite the advice, Georgia remained uncertain. The next morning, Georgia finally gave an answer to Paul's proposal. Unfortunately, it was a sorry because she couldn't accept. Though Paul was disappointed, he respected her decision, marking the end of their relationship. While Georgia wanted to enjoy the morning scenery, she spotted David playing with Gade's family's children. She smiled, watching her ex-husband. In the afternoon, Ren, David, and Georgia bid their goodbyes. On the boat, Georgia shared that she had rejected Paul's proposal. Hearing this, David smiled in relief. Bali had become a substitute for the dream house they once failed to build. For them, Bali was not just an ordinary island but a paradise to start anew. Falling in love with Bali, they didn't want to go back and even jumped off the boat. Moral lesson from the story: sometimes the key to a happy ending is not stealing rings or sabotaging weddings, but realizing that love is as unpredictable as a boat ride in Bali. Just go with the flow and enjoy the journey.